Welcome to the Weekly Wars podcast, where two guys who talk about Star Wars way too much have decided to record it and let you listen. Be sure to check every Wednesday to get the latest episode. And now to Zach and Rhett.
Before we start the intro to our podcast, I just want to say I invented the term Hickster.
Let it be known.
Just now, Hickster.
Hear ye.
Hear ye. All right, let's do it.
Welcome to Weekly Wars, your weekly dose of all things Star Wars.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 3, which we are calling How to Watch Movies, the Force Awakens style. I am Zachary Marsh.
And I'm Rhett Christensen.
Oh, and by the way, I should clarify, Rhett, R-H-E-T-T. If you haven't looked at the credits, some people keep thinking your name is Ren. Like Kylo Ren.
I'm not opposed.
You're
they
not
can keep thinking that.
Okay, sorry. I'll rescind my correction. His name is
Take
Ren.
It back, you filthy animal. You scruffy-looking nerf herder.
Oh, wow. Your insults.
Laser brain.
Laser brain.
Anyways, so
That's
watching
so
movies.
wizard.
Don't even.
It's working. It's working.
Are you an angel? They live on the moons of Viego, I think.
Oh, wow. We're going on a tangent already.
Anyways, watching movies is a skill that most people should learn because movies are a significant part of our culture now. But surprisingly, it is a skill very few people seem to exhibit.
Well, and it seems like they're forgetting how to watch films as we go along.
Or perhaps purposefully not wanting to watch a film based on some predetermined biases.
Well, yeah, there's that too. If you're doing that, you're just super dumb.
So the source of this podcast basically came from a Huffington Post quote article unquote that was written about.
He's really
Force
the only
Awakens.
guy I'm calling super dumb. The guy who wrote that article.
This particular author, he had 40 plot holes.
Unforgivable plot holes.
Well, I guess so.
That's what he said.
So 40 unforgivable plot holes that showed up in The Force Awakens, which it should be noted right away that many people don't even know what a plot hole is. There are many things that happen in a film where you'll hear screams of plot hole that are not, in fact, related to the plot at all.
Well, and yeah, most of what he said were not plot holes in any way. Like,
Right.
even if his complaint was accurate and valid,
Right.
it's not a plot hole. It was just a coincidence he didn't like,
Yeah.
or something like that. Right. And it should be noted that enough people have responded to this guy. If you look up the article, you can Google it. There's tons of comments underneath pointing out how ridiculous a bunch of his claims are. And the fact the Huffington Post would allow that to be published, which they are basically an advanced blog site,
Right.
is just sort of silly.
Yeah, it's basically 40 completely subjective opinions that this guy has by not watching a movie and then feeling that he had a right to author an article.
And the people sharing it and going, oh, yeah, this is totally right. And you fanboys just defend it. And it's like, no, there's very reasonable, rational explanations for almost all of these.
Right.
And some of them are setups for future films. Some of the 40 are just like, well, what about this? And you're all like, well, obviously that was set up for episode 8 and 9.
Or there are things that don't have to do anything with driving the plot along and don't really have to do with anything at all.
Yeah, don't have to do with anything at all. And then some where it's just like, as we said, you did not watch the movie, apparently. I don't know what movie you were watching because that was blatantly obvious.
Right. Go in and close your eyes and then go out and be upset about it.
Right. And so this isn't one of the ones we're talking about today, although I am talking about it now. This isn't on our list, but just to give you an example, is he complains as to how the Rathtars escape on on the ship that Han Solo has before he gets the Millennium Falcon back.
Which they had dialogue. They
Right.
had...
You see it. It's explained why. And then it happens.
Yeah.
If you can't get that, I don't know how you watch any movie.
Right. Anyways, so the first point that we would like to address deals with Finn. Because we have several moments in the movie that people have complained about him fighting in hand-to-hand combat.
Well, and we're sort of going to tie all the melee combat together in this.
Right.
So not just Finn, but also Rey.
Finn and Rey, because that is a complaint that has shown up, that they are able to compete with these other people that should be much better at melee than they are. But as we see in the movie itself, Finn is a trained stormtrooper. And unlike a lot of people saying that he's just a janitor, janitor was probably more of a temporary billet he had rather than his full-time job, because obviously his full-time profession was to be infantry, to be boots on the ground, raiding a village, and he was supposed to be killing people.
Which we can imply because he was boots on the ground raiding a village.
The very first time you see him, the very first significant scene is him participating in an infantry role. So he may have served as a janitor for a time, but that's just a billet. That is a temporary assignment and not his full-time military occupational specialty.
On top of that, when we finally see him in his first melee combat, he is challenged by a stormtrooper, which Finn also is, and the stormtrooper knows melee combat.
And is carrying a melee weapon.
A melee weapon that apparently can fight a lightsaber, which gives you the hint that maybe they had training to fight people with lightsabers, like, I don't know, Jedi?
Right, and some of this is explained more in books, but you don't need the book to see at this point.
And that's kind of our point in this episode. The movie is enough information.
Right. There is another stormtrooper who has a melee weapon. Finn was a stormtrooper. He probably had melee training, and that is made evident by the fact that he's able to hold his own. By no means is he an expert, because he gets taken down pretty quickly.
Well, and he probably had training with melee weapons, but maybe not a lightsaber specifically, right?
Yeah.
And so that's probably why he's still struggling to sort of figure it out.
Right, especially because depending on the physics of the weapon, it could be either completely uncontrollable or weigh basically nothing, which both would be hard to compensate. And it's made evident by the fact that the baton wielder, the TR-8R, is able to beat him up.
Oh, yeah. Well, and what's interesting about that, too, is he loses that fight and he loses the fight at the end.
Right. Against Kylo Ren, he does lose. And there's no way you could say that Kylo had a hard time fighting against Finn, because taking one small shoulder wound does not mean he had a hard time, especially when he gave the same type of wound to Finn and then cut him up.
Oh, yeah.
So
I just can't see the logical connection when you're all like, why does Finn know how to use melee weapons? Well, apparently he's not that great because he got beat by two people. And now, if you're taking it in context of the Before the Awakening book, we actually know that Finn is actually pretty good with melee weapons. And so he was adapting to the weapon, and that's why he lost to FN2199 or TR-8R. And later on to Kylo Ren, he was pretty good, but he still ended up losing. But that's sort of an aside because, like I said, we're
on that
talking
same
about
note,
the movie.
Rey, it has a scene specifically set up to imply that she is competent at melee, and so for her to go and be able to defend herself for a time against Ren, is indicative of that. She doesn't press the offensive at all, so she's not winning in that first half. She is retreating constantly. She's fighting defensively. So in no way is she being considered as the victor at that point until she gives into the Force. So she knows enough based on that scene with Unkar thugs that she can hold her own until she fully gives herself over to the Force. And that is what allows her to beat Kylo Ren. Not any particular efficiency or training or technique with the weapon, but allowing the Force to guide her actions.
And well, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Rey and the Force then, because there's been a lot of complaints that, oh, she's so powerful, and how did she do all of these things in the film, and how was she able to fight at the end? And, you know, there was actually a progression to that point.
There were several awakenings.
Awakenings.
It's almost like the Force was awakening in her.
It's almost like the main villain in the trilogy explicitly stated that the Force was awakening.
I didn't know that wasn't in the movie.
That didn't happen?
No, that was definitely, I mean.
Did you take a restroom break during that time?
No, you don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know what I'm talking about. The first time.
That did happen. That totally did happen. That was in the trailer. It was everything.
The first time we see Rey obviously using the Force, and I actually think that we could argue that some of what she was doing on the Millennium Falcon and Jakku, or any type of survival moments up until that point, she may have been supplemented by the Force.
An inherent ability,
right?
That slightly manifested itself.
That's always been there, sort of like Maz says. But the first time we see it is when her and Kylo Ren is going to interrogate her,
right?
And she's
able to actively resist him. Not just try and resist him and try and keep him out. She's able to push back and into his own mind.
But what I think is interesting about that scene is when I was watching it, I was thinking, man, this is excruciating because we're watching her go through this torture. But she's adapting, she's learning, and she's seeing what he's doing, and she's fighting back.
Right.
And so she's learning as she's going along.
Right. It's basically reflexive at that point.
And then Kylo Ren, not able to get the information he wants, goes and reports to his master, she's stronger than she knows.
Right. That doesn't mean anything.
That doesn't mean anything. That's not relevant to her being powerful in the Force. That's nothing. And then she uses her Force to get the mind control the stormtrooper to let her out of her shackles.
Right. And one thing that could lead up to that moment is the fact that when she realizes Luke is not a myth, it seems to open up her mind to the possibilities. Because first she learns that Luke, Jedi, the Force are all real things that have existed.
That she's heard about.
She's heard myths. She's heard stories. You can only imagine at that point, the hero that brought down the Empire would have dozens and hundreds of myths about him. So she's heard these stories probably her whole life, especially living on the ship graveyard that is Jakku with all the remnants of the Empire around.
Where you have people from all over the galaxy. There was all kinds of different aliens of all sorts of different types gathered together.
So
and
she's
not
heard
only
these
that,
stories.
Oh yeah, and she's heard stories of Han Solo too. So who knows what stories she's heard? So it's not that you can imply without any extra information that she may have heard that it's possible for Jedi to mind control people, and that's why she's like, maybe I can do that.
Right. Because first she hears that, next she has the vision brought on by the lightsaber, then she finds herself able to push back against Kylo Ren. So you have to assume at that point that she is thinking, well, maybe this could work, and you can even hear it in her voice as she's trying it. Her very first attempt and even her second attempt are unsteady and questioning. She doesn't know if it'll work. And then she resolves to it she has another awakening, perhaps, and says with a clear and firm voice her command, and he obeys. So at that point, she is realizing, holy cow, I might actually have this. And I think the only reason you don't get that moment of pure celebration is because she had to get the freak out of there before she got discovered.
Well, and another thing I like to point out is in the 40 plot holes, quote unquote, he says one of his complaints is that Rey is as good of a Jedi as Luke Skywalker in a few minutes as Luke ever becomes throughout the movies. And I'd like to point out in the first movie, Luke makes an impossible shot from space into the Death Star with no computer.
Right.
That is by and far way more insane than anything we see Rey do in this film with the Force.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, he was raised by Owen and Beru, who probably secluded him as much as possible from those types of stories. He didn't have the full background of the lore of the Jedi that Rey probably did. He was kept away from that specifically so he wouldn't go seeking it out. So he had to learn things more from scratch than she did. And also, Luke is fairly powerful by Return of the Jedi. I mean, he's mind-tricking people. He's...
he takes on 2 Sith Lords.
He takes on 2 Sith Lords and powerful and wise enough to know to throw down his weapon to win the battle. That's very significant. But that is slightly off topic.
Sorry, it's related. But no, it's totally true. So we have to talk about the bowcaster.
Absolutely. Because that is something with one of the biggest setups of the movie that almost everyone chooses to ignore about the injury that it gives to Kylo Ren.
Right. So we've been talking previously about these melee battles, and people complain that, well, if Ren is so trained, which he's not, we know he's trained, but he has not finished his training, which is explicitly stated. And I keep using the word explicitly, but it's true.
It is applicable.
And so, as you're saying, Kylo Ren struggles in that last fight because he's been shot by this bowcaster that was set up. So the first time is on the ship that Han Solo and Chewie are smuggling the Rathtars in, I believe. That's
when Chewie gets shot as they're trying to run away, and Han picks up the bowcaster and shoots it, and has a moment in the middle of a firefight, basically, where he's like, "Holy crap, this thing is awesome."
And that's not the only moment. That's the first time that we're given a hint that this blaster is powerful. Time 2, travel forward to Takodana after the First Order has attacked the planet and ransacked the castle. They pop out, and they're hiding behind some rocks, and Han Solo says, "Hey, can I see that for a second?" And fires, and it like blows up.
Right. It sends
like
2 troopers.
Is it
flying.
2? 2
it's
of them go flying.
2. It could be more. It's at least 2 blown away by the impact of the bowcaster. Like that is significant.
And then Kylo Ren, in a moment of weakness, he just killed his father. He's obviously struggling between the light and the dark side.
Right. He had to deny his impulse towards the light in order to murder his own father. So he's struggling emotionally after he's slain him. And so it allows Chewbacca to get a shot in on him. And
with this same weapon that has been established multiple times is a very powerful gun.
And that would deliver a very grievous injury.
Which we believe Kylo Ren uses to fuel his anger for the final fight, which would be necessary if he is needing extra assistance from such a wound.
Yeah, but you could probably assume at that point that any extra benefit that the pain and anger would give him is offset by the debilitating side wound he has. And the giant cauterized hole of flesh in his ribcage.
And I'm sure his suit provides some amount of armor, and that's probably why he survived instead of instantly died.
Right.
But yeah, if you didn't catch the setup of the bowcaster being powerful and then him being shot by that same weapon, that's on you, man.
Right. Well, I think this is actually a good time to bring up one of our bonus points, because it is pretty interesting that for how long Chewie and Han have been rolling around the galaxy together, Han has never used Chewie's bowcaster, apparently. I mean, I assume that he's always had his blaster. That's his preferred weapon when he needs to use it. So it's not that surprising, but it definitely was a good setup to have that moment there. And that's the most convenient weapon. He grabs it, and it's like, oh.
Well, and this is one of the complaints. Why hasn't Han used Chewie's bowcaster? And if you pay attention, in the original trilogy, when Chewie fires his bowcaster, it fires a green blast.
Right.
But in The Force Awakens, it fires a red blast.
Right.
So, and this isn't typical movie watching. This is definitely a little bit of nerd movie watching and implication. But from that, you can either assume that, one, Chewie has a new bowcaster, or two, he's had his bowcaster upgraded.
Right. A pretty significant upgrade because it was not throwing around stormtroopers with the same amount of ease in Empire Strikes Back.
And maybe it has multiple settings and stuff like that. Who knows? But there is a different color. So you can assume one or the other, meaning that maybe Han Solo hasn't used this new bowcaster.
Right. Entirely possible.
And he had used the old bowcaster before for the last 28 years until Chewie finally upgraded because technology got better.
That doesn't happen.
That doesn't happen in real life. Never happens.
So, yeah, that's just an interesting bonus point. One of the last things we wanted to talk about is the rift that appears between Rey and Kylo during their confrontation, because many people have cited that as a pretty strong coincidence. And what should be noted is that the planet is crumbling apart at that point. It is blowing up from the inside. There's actually a rift that had appeared earlier. I don't know if people notice this, but earlier, right behind Rey as she's trying to run away, which is a pretty big coincidence in itself, right?
Right.
Or not. So she's trying to run away. There's a rift that appears and prevents her from running more. And then she's able to push back. They have their fight. She cuts the lightsaber in half. And as they're standing there contemplating each other, another rift opens up. And for one, it's already been set up because you've seen it happen. And for another, it is a movie.
Well, and that's just it. Coincidences are in movies. Without coincidence in movies and stories in general, like, I don't think any movie would exist. If you were to take out all of the coincidences, there might be some, like, really terrible independent films.
Right.
But overall, I mean, coincidence is what makes it interesting. You're like,
coincidence is a part of storytelling.
It came together so
anything.
Yeah. Well, I'm like, what about when Kylo Ren is standing on the bridge and the light goes out because the sun is finally drained, and that's when he embraces the dark side?
Right.
This isn't a plot hole. It's a coincidence, and it's an awesome coincidence.
It is one of the best coincidences that happen in the whole movie because it's so visually striking, and it's just an amazing cue to let you know that he is choosing the dark side at that moment.
They're telling the story with visuals, and they're helping you see that. And so it just blows my mind they consider that a plot hole. Like,
even the rift is a visual indication of the paths that they have chosen. She has chosen the light. She chose to steady and calm herself to give in to the light side of the Force to oppose him, who's obviously chosen the dark. So that rift that appears, while maybe a coincidence, is also symbolic of their paths.
Totally.
There's one for the history books.
And just another small one. One of the plot holes was that the Knights of Ren are talked about and never seen. But first of all, even if that was the case, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Like, even if we didn't see them.
Yeah. Well, and this is this kind of ties in to complaints that people have about the movie that are complaints that are also found in the original trilogy, if you wanted to complain about them. Because I know I read somewhere, someone said there's no backstory for The Force Awakens. And for some reason that makes it a terrible movie because you don't know the past 30-year history. And the only thing I can say is that guy, whoever wrote that, probably grew up in a world where he was watching the prequels first, because for everyone else who watched the original trilogy when they were younger, we didn't have that backstory either. Most of us didn't grow up with everything from the past 30 years laid out for you.
Well, and even as the movies progressed, it was clear that time had passed, and none of us were all like, what happened in the 5 years between those two episodes?
Right, between episode 4 and episode 5, it's about 5 years. And
things happened.
Things happened, and we didn't need to know about it for the current time frame. I mean, Star Wars is particular storytelling trope, at least starting the movie, is in media res. It's in the middle of the story. And that's how it's supposed to be for a Star Wars movie.
Well, and what mattered was there was the good guys and the bad guys.
That's
Maz
all you need.
says it herself. That's the fight.
You have the light and the dark. You have the bad guys with their goals trying to set out and accomplish them, and you have the good guys with their goals trying to set out and accomplish those.
So let's set all of that aside. We do see the Knights of Ren. I don't know what happened.
Right.
It's in a vision, and you know what? If they aren't the Knights of Ren, then whatever. I'm totally wrong.
Yeah,
Although
Abrams did a terrible job there.
But they're wearing similar armor.
They all have masks that vaguely resemble each other.
Right, and they're with each other in the rain where the Jedi were being killed.
Right. Ren is there. He is a Knight of Ren. He is the leader of the Knights of Ren, and there's guys standing behind him that look similar. It may be a stretch, but I'd say they're the Knights of Ren.
And they do have the concept art, so we do know they are the Knights of Ren.
Right.
And so, but even if I don't even know. Like, it's just there. But if you're paying attention and look at those visual clues, you get it, and it's fine. I don't understand.
Right.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So that about sums it up for The Force Awakens. We did have a bonus point.
Bonus.
That I wanted to address. This is mainly due to some comments and even a meme that I've seen in the last couple of days while preparing for this episode.
And this almost gives us a tie-in to our next episode.
Indeed it does.
Because we're going to talk about prequels next time.
Some prequel stuff. So this bonus point is found in the prequel trilogy in Revenge of the Sith. And specifically, I've seen comments relating to people wondering why they weren't able to save Padme at the end. She gives birth to the twins and she dies. And the meme was to the effect of they were able to give Anakin a cyborg suit so he could live after he got his limbs cut off and he was burned by lava, but they couldn't save someone who just gave birth to babies. And the only thing I can say about that is the medical droid at the station says something to the effect of, medically, she is totally fine, but she has lost the will to live. So she has, in her soul, if you will, given up on life because she was probably just betrayed by the love of her life and the father of her children. That's emotionally traumatizing, I'm sure.
Well, this isn't totally non-existent in real life either. Like, a desire to live helps people get better. if you're laying around being sick all the time and allowing yourself to be consumed by that sickness, you actually will not get better. You'll get less and less healthy.
Right. But if you're physically fighting as well as emotionally fighting, then it gives you an edge. And she lost that edge. So for people to say, well, they couldn't save her life, it's like, yeah, I mean, they could have. I'm sure they could have installed all sorts of cybernetic and implants and robotic prostheses, and she could have lived in a facsimile of herself. But for one, they weren't evil. The medical staff and Obi-Wan Kenobi weren't going to let that happen. And for another, she lost the will to live, so anything that they made her body into would just be a husk.
Well, and not to mention, and some people have debated the significance of this and whether Palpatine is telling the truth or not, or I guess Emperor Palpatine at this point. But Darth Vader asks what happened to Padme, and he says, in your anger, you killed her. And that could be a part of what sucked the will to live out of her. Like he may have used the Force in his anger to do something to her.
Right.
And even if Palpatine's lying, maybe Palpatine is the one who did something to her that was making it so she wasn't able to survive. Like he was using the dark side to manipulate her emotions to take her into an even darker place.
Yeah. What is it? The Dumak technique?
Dumak.
Or Dimmak?
Dimmak. You're such a nerd. But these things are actually said in the movie, right? I mean, we can speculate about it, but it's obviously that there's dialogue that actually talks about it and explains it, that actually you can have a discussion about and go, so what happened?
Right. Like I looked up earlier on the IMDb page for Revenge of the Sith, in the quotes, it has that block of dialogue between the medical droid and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and it says she lost the will to live. Like that was a part of the script. So that, and many of these other points that we've brought up, are things that are expressly and explicitly stated in the framework of the film or films, and people have chosen to ignore it, or they didn't pay attention.
Which is funny. But yeah, so this is our version of how to watch a movie the Force Awakens style. A lot of what we talked about, we actually could talk about the principles of, and maybe we'll do that sometime in the future. Just set up and pay off in films and structure, character arcs. we basically talked about all those
unimportant things,
but just in context of the film. But that's all that we have for this week. Thanks for stopping by. Be sure to share our podcast with your friends. If they're totally nerdy, we want to hear from you. We are nerds. You can post on YouTube, get on our Facebook page. We want to hear from you.
We are available on iTunes.
Oh, yes.
We're that cool.
Our podcast is on iTunes. You can share it with your friends. Get it on your phone. We also host on podbean.com. That's an app you can get for Android or iPhone. And just look for Weekly Wars, and you can pull up our podcast and get it there as well. So thanks a lot for coming, and
may the Force be ever in your favor.